Hi there, here's another lesson for you if you are either blind or partially sighted and you're learning the DG Melodeon. So this is the basics part 3. I want to start off with a couple of bits of terminology which you may not have picked up on from my first 2 videos. I often say on the push or on the pull. I think it's fairly obvious, but just to make sure you've understood it, if you put your finger on a right hand button, a treble button, a melody button if you like, press that button down and push the bellows towards the closed position. In other words, you're exerting pressure on the left hand cabinet and pushing it to the right. I'm playing button 3 on the G row, that's the row on the inside, with finger 1, pushing down that button and pushing the bellows towards the closed position. That's called on the push. If I do the same thing and exert pressure on the bass strap and pull to the left, so the bellows are opening, that's on the pull. So on the push is closing the bellows, on the pull is opening the bellows. And on the push you're expelling air from the bellows, and on the pull you're drawing air into the bellows. Right, now in lesson 2, the basics, I talked about these various layouts for the instrument. And one of those layouts was the 3rd button start with low notes, which is a reasonably rare layout. I wouldn't say it's incredibly rare, but as I said yesterday and the day before, most people have the layout which is 3rd button start with accidentals. But if you do have 3rd button start with low notes, the thing I neglected to say yesterday in any real detail was that the notes on the push are all found in the major chord of the row. So I'm going to use my piano to demonstrate this. Have a listen to these 3 notes: G, B, D. And those 3 notes, if I play them together, would make a chord of G major. And those 3 notes are the 1st, 3rd and 5th notes in the scale of G major. So if I play from G up to another G, G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, G. Notice there was an F sharp there. So G is the 1st, A is the 2nd, B is the 3rd, C is the 4th, D is the 5th, E is the 6th, F sharp is the 7th, and the top G is called the 8th, an octave above the 1st note. So the 1st, 3rd and 5th notes in that scale, G, B and D, put those together and that is a chord of G major. On the 3rd button start Melodeon with low notes, on the G row you're only going to find those notes when you press the buttons down and push in. Now on the G row, starting with button 1, you actually get B first of all, so you get B and then D, and then you don't get to your root note, your G, until you play the 3rd note. So it doesn't matter what order you play these notes in, they are all notes found in the chord of G major. So I'm going to play this on the piano because I actually don't have a Melodeon with low notes, 3rd button start with low notes. So I'm going to play the notes as they would sound at the right pitch on this type of Melodeon, starting with button 1, that's at the chin end, and going to button 10. So you have B, by the way it's the B just below middle C, you have B, D, G, and then again B, D, G, and then B, D, G, and there's an extra B at the end of it. So it's B, D, G 3 times and an extra B at the top. That should give you 10 notes on 10 buttons. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So only notes that are found in the chord of G major. On the D row, okay, same sort of idea. If I play these 3 notes, D, F sharp and A, that's a chord of D major. Now in the scale of D major, going from one D up to another, you'll hear that I will sharpen 2 notes. I'll sharpen the F and the C. Let's have a listen to those notes. So D is the 1st note, 1st degree as we call it. E the 2nd, F sharp the 3rd, G the 4th, A the 5th, B the 6th, C sharp the 7th, and D the 8th, the octave above the 1st. So if I take the 1st and the 3rd and the 5th notes out of that, D is the 1st, F sharp is the 3rd, and A is the 5th. D, F sharp and A. And on a melodeon that has 3rd button start with low notes, you'll only find those 3 notes on the push on the D row. Button 1 will give you this low F sharp, the F sharp below middle C. I spoke about this yesterday. So button 1 is F sharp, button 2 is A, and you get your root note, let's I call it the root note, the name note of the row, when you get to button 3. Now there are generally 11 buttons, there's one more button on this row than you have on the G row. So you have F sharp A D, F sharp A D, F sharp A D 3 times, and then you have F sharp and A again at the end. So I'm going to play these notes on the piano, as I don't have this type of melodeon, from the button 1 to button 11, so the notes will go progressively higher pitched, even though I would be going geographically down the melodeon towards my knees. This is what we have: F sharp, A, D, F sharp, A, D, F sharp, A, D, and F sharp, A. So that would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 notes. That's what you hear on the D row of a melodeon that's got 3rd button start with low notes. And I didn't really sort of go into it in any detail yesterday, and perhaps it was a bit confusing for you. So a major chord comprises the 1st, 3rd and 5th notes taken out of a major scale. Let's compare that to my polka work here, which is a 3rd button start with accidentals. All the notes from button 2 onwards are found in the major chord of that row. Remember, button 1 has got that high pitched accidental, so I'm going to play from button 2 down to button 10 and tell you the names of the notes that I've got. So button 2 is D, button 3 is G, button 4 is B, and then D, G, B, and then D, G and B. And on the D row, from button 2 downwards, remember button 1's got that G sharp, so button 2 is A, button 3 is D, button 4 is F sharp, carrying on A, D, F sharp, A, D and F sharp. So again, with this instrument you don't hear the root note, the name note, until you play button 3, exactly the same as with the 3rd button start with low notes layout. I'm going to change to my Erica melodeon now, which is a 4th button start with the low G major scale, and show you how it works on that. Now this melodeon is 4th button start, so you won't hear that root note until we play button 4. Now the G row and the D row are different because we need that low G major scale. So when I play the G row on the push of this instrument, I've got F on button 1, which is the accidental, then I've got B, D, G, B, D, G, B, D, G. So I was getting all notes from the major chord of G from button 2 downwards. Now for the D row, this is a little bit different. I've got G sharp on button 1. Remember, this is all notes on the push. I've got G, lower G on button 2, and from button 3 onwards I get the notes found in the chord of D major. In other words, D, F sharp and A, although the first one we hear is A. So I have G sharp button 1, G button 2, and then we get into our major chord notes: A button 3, D button 4, F sharp on button 5, and then A, D, F sharp, A, D and F sharp. Of course, with a 4th button start instrument we lose some of those very high pitched notes because obviously we've reprogrammed, if you like, some lower buttons. But it's not a problem, to be honest, because those really high pitched notes we very, very rarely play. We can easily lose those. Some people call that the dusty or squeaky end. Don't forget, you can play chords On both sides of the Melodeon you can play chords with the right hand and the left hand. On my right hand here, back on my third button start Hohner poker work, I'm going to press down buttons 3, 4 and 5 on the G row on the push, okay, and that gives me a chord of G major. The notes I've got there are G, B and D, and if I combine those three, that's a chord of G major. And if I just press one button on the left hand side, and it's button 3 on the outside row, pushing of course, you can hear a rather different G major called lower pitched. We tend to play chords on the left hand side and notes on the right, but sometimes when I'm playing I'll play little chords with the right hand, and we can get into that at a later date. Now I've talked an awful lot about notes on the push. What about the notes on the pull? Well, what are they? Well, basically those notes are all the notes that aren't in that major chord. Now in G major I said you've got G, B, D, G, B, D over and over again. So G, B and D are the three notes found in the chord of G major. So all the notes on the pull are all the notes that aren't in that chord of G major. So if we go to button 3 and pull out, that's A. If we go to button 4 and pull out, that is C. If we go to button 5 and pull out, that's E. And if we go to button 6 and pull out, that's F sharp. So A, C, E and F sharp, and then that gets repeated below that. So on the D row, same sort of thing. Remember button 3, button 4, button 5, that's D, F sharp and A, and then D, F sharp and A, all the way through D, F sharp and A. Those are the notes we find on the push, those are the notes in the chord of D major. So if I pull on button 3 on the D row, I've got E. If I go to button 4, I've got G. If I go to button 5, I've got B. And if I go to button 6, I've got C sharp. So I've got E, G, B and C sharp. E, G, B and C sharp. So on the push it was D, F sharp and A. On the pull it was E, G, B and C sharp. And then it's repeated below that. So those are the notes not found in the chord of D major, and those are the notes you find on the pull. I've spoken a bit about the bass accompaniment notes, and I'm talking about the buttons, the even number buttons on the left hand side. Button 2 outside row push, I get D, and on the pull I get A. Button 4 on the outside row, on the push I get G, and on the pull I get D. On the inner row, that's the row to the right of that, on button 2 on the push I get B, and on the pull I get E, and on button 4 on the inside row, on the push I get C, and on the pull I get C. Same note. Now this is the if you like, out of your pa. You can hear clearly your pa there, which is a bass note and then a chord. But I'm talking about the bass notes. So on my Hohner poker work here, each bass button, although I'm saying it's a note of G, let's just try button 4 outside row push. That's the note G, but actually what I'm hearing is two notes. I've got one note which is an octave below the lowest note with the same name on the treble side, and one an octave below that. So you should be able to hear, you may or may not be able to hear that, I guess, but you should be able to hear two different notes, one really low G and one G that's an octave below this G. I've just played the G note on the right hand side, button 3 on the push. So that's that G on the right hand side. Then on the left hand side, when I play the G bass note, which is button 4 on the push, I've got the G note an octave below the note on the right hand side, and another G note an octave below that. So it's pretty deep, isn't it? If I was to play the left hand button there and that right hand G button, I'd have a total span of 2 octaves. And of course, if I added a G major chord into the mix, so if I played button 4 and button 3 on the outside row on the left there with that G note, that's a very rich sound. That's those 2 notes from the bass note, the octave Gs, the G major chord on the left hand side, which is G, B and D, and that G note on the right hand side. So I'm actually pressing 3 buttons down to get that. So yeah, it's a very, very rich sound. By the way, that right hand G is, okay, we're calling it a G note, but it's actually 2 G notes at the same pitch. I say the same pitch, but actually slightly detuned. So we get that lovely beating sound. Now, other instruments, indeed other polka works, may give you a different arrangement depending on how they've been set up. Some boxes will have 3 or maybe even 4 stacked octaves on each bass note. I think my Dino Buffetti gives me 3 notes from 1 button, so there's a span of 2 octaves on that. I mean, the important thing to remember is that no matter how many octaves you have, they're all the same note with the same name, whereas in a chord the 3 notes are different. In other words, G major is G, B and D notes played together. Hope you're understanding the difference between notes and chords now. The final thing I want to talk about in today's lesson is this thing about B minor versus B major. Now, I mentioned yesterday that on all my DG boxes, all my DG Melodeons, I've had button 1 inside row on the push converted to B minor. Now I'm playing it there. This is obviously the left hand side. So inside row, button 1 on the push, B minor. I mentioned yesterday that if you buy a Melodeon straight from the factory or from a shop maybe, normally that chord comes stock as B major, and I talked about the difference yesterday. B minor has the notes B, D and F sharp, and B major has the notes B, D sharp and F sharp, so it's that note in the middle, the third note of the scale, that's different. Okay, why would you choose one over the other? And this is a fairly contentious thing amongst Melodeon players. For me, I always have B minor on my instruments, but there'll be loads and loads of Melodeon players who would swear by having a B major. I mean, you need B minor if you are playing in D, in the key of D major, as B minor is the relative minor of D major and has the same key signature, F sharp and C sharp. I'm going to go to my piano again. I'm going to play you a couple of scales. First of all, I'm going to play the scale of D major. Listen to this. And I'm going to tell you the names of the notes I'm playing. D, E, F sharp, G, A, B, C sharp, and D. You might remember from previous lessons, in the scale of D major you have to sharpen the F and the C. Now I'm going to play from B up to B, playing exactly the same notes. So I'm going to play this, have a listen to this. Now I play B, C sharp, D, E, F sharp, G, A, B. So you notice I played exactly the same notes that I played in the scale of D major. But instead of going from D up to D, I went from B up to B. And that is the scale of B natural minor. And that's why we say that B minor is the relative minor of D major, and D major is the relative major of B minor. They both have the same key signature, we call that. Now, if you play a B major chord with a D note, you're going to have a clash or a discord, because you can have a D note on the right hand side, but in the chord you'll have a D sharp if you're playing a B major chord. So a D and a D sharp together, I'll play you that so you can hear what that sounds like. A horrible noise. That's a clash or a discord. Let's show you the chord and I'll show you the note with it. So I'm going to play a B minor chord with the left hand. I'm going to play B, D and F sharp like this. So here is my B minor chord. Now if I play a D with that, that's lovely. Now if I change my chord to B major, if I play B, D sharp and F sharp like that, sounds lovely on its own. But if I play that D again, It's really horrible, isn't it? So that's a clash. That's no good. Now bear in mind that the only D sharp, or E flat if you like, on a conventional DG box is as an accidental. Remember, on the G row, button 1 on the pull, that note is, well, we called it E flat. We can also call it D sharp. D sharp and E flat are the same thing. That's called enharmonic. We say those two notes are enharmonic. D sharp is 1 semitone higher than D, and E flat is 1 semitone lower than E. It's the same thing. So you can call D sharp E flat, you can call E flat D sharp, and it depends what key signature you're in. We won't get too heavily into that, but there's that D sharp. Okay, now if I play a D major chord with that, you'll hear what happens. Sounds really horrible, doesn't it? Even if you had a B major chord, it would only be available on the push, so you wouldn't even be able to play that D sharp with it, because you'd be pulling for the D sharp note and pushing for the B major chord. You can see, the case I'm making here for having a B minor chord. You could end up playing a D note in the key of E minor, as in William Taylor's tabletop hornpipe, which I'm going to teach you pretty soon, for which you might need a B minor chord. Let me play a little bit of that for you. And there I played a B minor chord, and there, as I sounded that B minor chord, I played a D note with the right hand. You see, so that's a real good reason why you should have a B minor chord. If you have got a B major chord on your instrument and you don't want to, or you don't know how to change the third in the chord to D sharp, and that's really a job for a fettler, you can create the next best thing to a B minor, which is B minor 7th, without changing anything on your Melodeon. And the way you do that is you play a D major chord on the push, and that is button 1 outside row on the push, with a B bass note, which is button 2 inside row on the push. Now what that gives you there is a B minor 7th, which is a passable B minor chord, to be honest. This chord contains B, D, F sharp and A, so it has the necessary D note, but of course it's spread across 2 buttons, a kind of a diagonal shape. If you wanted to do that, you'd put your second finger on the bass B and your first finger on that D chord, that D major chord. That's a very acceptable way of getting around the B minor problem if you have a B major. And even if you've got B minor and you want B minor 7th, I often play this chord. It's a lovely chord. So the jury's out. Some players insist on having a B major and some a B minor. I mean, from my experience, I found B minor is more useful, but that's not everyone's experience, and you'll have to discover what's best for you in the fullness of time. So that's the end of lesson 3 on the basics of the DG Melodeon. You can see even the basics are pretty complicated. There's quite a lot to think about, but I think it's great to have all this information at your fingertips before you really get into playing. Makes you a much more musical player and a better player for it, I think. Thank you very much for listening, and you'll hear from me very soon.